You know, Ken Dryden said it best in his book, The Game. There is no Leafs-Canadiens rivalry. The Leafs killed it. The ineptitude of the franchise from 1967 on, run by a bunch of crackpots, including Harold Ballard, bad drafts, bad trades, bad results, one playoff win in almost 2 decades. We're upcoming the Montreal-Toronto series, first round. Toronto's a better team. Montreal's injured. If Montreal loses, so what? If Toronto wins, so what? Because Leafs fans, you've been cheated. There is no rivalry against the Montreal Canadiens. The rivalry that you should have got behind when you were doing nothing in the 1980s and 90s for most of the decade was the Battle of Quebec. Now, the modern Maple Leaf fan doesn't want to admit it, but no one gave a shit when Montreal and Toronto played because Montreal was dominant in the late 70s. But the Quebec-Montreal rivalry, my God, ladies and gentlemen, Machiavellian, Shakespearean, the Vikings versus, whoever they were battling. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Battle of Quebec, and for most of you, all 10 of you out there that may be Leafs fans and don't know what I'm talking about, the Quebec Nordiques were the dominant East Coast team in the WHA in the 1970s, won the AFCO Cup in 1977. Montreal was a dominant East Coast team in the NHL for the decade of the 70s, and when the WHA merged with the NHL, Quebec, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Hartford came over. Quebec was put in Montreal's division after the realignment, and there's where the shit hit the fan. Now, this rivalry lasted only 15-16 years between the 80 season and 95. The teams played against each other, get this, 5 times in the NHL playoffs, and the Canadiens won 3 of the series. One meeting in 84 resulted in the Good Friday Massacre, a game which multiple battles happened, and approximately 15 to 20 fights between the end of the second period and the possible start of the third period. Now, the Battle of Quebec extended to politics, in which the Canadiens and Nordiques became symbols for rival parties, beer distribution, and other factors, and the teams were both owned by competing breweries, and some people believe sovereignty versus federalism. Now, the Nords began playing in 1972 in the WHA. Now, as part of the new league's raid on NHL talent, the team signed Montreal Canadiens star J.C. Tremblay to a 5-year contract. He also hired former Montreal Canadian legend Maurice Richard and Jacques Plante as head coaches. The Canadiens-Nordiques rivalry began in the 1980 season in earnest when the Nordiques became one of the 4 WHA teams to join the NHL as part of the merge. The Canadiens originally were one of the 5 teams to vote down the merger, which makes absolutely no sense because the money they made from it is in the billions. However, the Canadiens owner, Molson Brewery, feared that Canadian cities with WHA teams in the deal would boycott the brand, and the team supported the merger in a subsequent vote. At first, the teams were placed in different divisions. Montreal was in the North, while Quebec was in the Adams division. Now, the teams played their first game against each other in Montreal on October 13, 1979, which the Habs won 3-1. The Nordiques hosted a rivalry for the first time on October 29th and upset the Canadiens 5-4. A YouTube of this game is available. I think Michel Larocque had started. The Ottawa Citizen wrote that the victory marked the end of a decades-old Quebec belief that Montreal was unbeatable. The rivalry was fairly even in the first few years, from 1980 to 82 regular seasons, with the Canadiens going 6-5-5 in the series, and had just win away from the Montreal Forum. Now, when the NHL realigned before the 82 season, and the Canadiens were placed in the Adams division with the Nordiques, now in the 82 playoffs, the teams met in the postseason for the first time. After a Game 1 loss, the Nordiques won the next 2 games, putting them in a position to win the best-of-5 series. But Montreal rebounded to win the 4th game 6-2. The contest featured a combined 251 penalty minutes, including 159 from one first-period altercation. Now, the Forum was decided Game 5, where the Canadiens scored twice in the third period to force a 2-2 tie and a series-deciding overtime period. The game and series came to a quick end, 22 seconds in the extra frame, when the nemesis of Montreal, Dale Hunter, scored after a 2-on-1 odd-man rush pass Rick Wamsley to give the Nordiques the victory. Now, 82 83 playoffs, Buffalo knocks out Montreal. Nordiques go on a run. They were Stanley Cup contenders around this time. Now, the 84 playoffs, 2 years later, the teams met again in the postseason, but this time the rivalry had given the Battle of Quebec nickname, mostly by the Anglophone press, because Nordiques would very rarely be shown on Hockey Night in Canada until the Battle of Quebec started coming to fore. Now, the team split their first 4 games in the best-of-7 series before Montreal won Game 5 in Quebec City 4-0. Now, Game 6, which became known as the Good Friday Massacre, took place at the Forum on April 20th, 1984. The Canadians rallied from a 2-goal deficit in the third period to win 5-3 and clinch the series. Now, the 5 straight goals were against Dan Bouchard, who said to the media after the win in 82 that God has chosen the Nordiques to win that series. When he lost the series, some members of the media asked him, "Where was God tonight, Dan?" And he refused to answer. Now, the game get out of hand quickly at the end of the second period with multiple brawls at the start of the end of the second and the start of the third, or the warm-up. The fighting started as the second period was ending after an incident between Hunter and Guy Carbonneau, who was pinned to the ice by Hunter. More than 10 minutes of brawling followed, and the teams were giving 222 penalty minutes for just the second period. 10 players were thrown out the game between both brawls, but several were not immediately told of their injections after the first one, as the officials had not finished recording all of the penalties during the intermission. A 10-minute second bench-clearing brawl occurred after announcement of the injections, and the total number of penalty minutes in game exceeded well over 250. Now, in the 8 games between the teams during the 85 season, the Canadians lost only once, posting 6 victories. A lot of people think, well, the Nordiques are right for the picking. However, the 85 playoffs saw the Canadians and the Nordiques face each other in the postseason for the third time in 4 years, and it was a big difference. They won the first, and Quebec won the first and third games in overtime, and jumped out to 3-2 lead after winning Game 5 in Montreal 5-1. However, the Canadians responded with a 5-2 win in Quebec City in the 6th game, sending the series to decisive Game 7 back in Montreal. After regulation play solved nothing with a 2-2 tie, the game entered overtime, and Peter Stastny scored on a face-off at 2:22 of the extra period, giving the Nordiques the game and the series. And of course, the Nordiques had advanced to the semifinals yet again. Now, the teams did not meet the 86 playoffs, which Montreal had won the Cup, as the Nordiques lost to the Hartford Whalers in the first round, while the Habs again won the Stanley Cup. In 87, of course, the rematch, Montreal and Quebec had their 4th playoff matchup in 5 years. The Nordiques won the first 2 games in the Montreal Forum before the Canadians evened the series with a pair of wins in Quebec City. Game 4 was decided in overtime and featured, get this, a pre-game fight. Montreal won Game 5 at home, though not without controversy. With a score tied 2-2 late in the third, Alain Côté, a former Montreal Canadiens draft pick, scored what appeared to be the go-ahead goal for the Nordiques, past Brian Hayward, only to see it waved off due to offsetting penalties on both teams. Ryan Walzer then netted the game winner for the Habs 14 seconds later. Quebec coach, the Tiger Michel Bergeron, called his team's loss a crime, saying no one wants to let us win. One attorney in Quebec City offered to help the Nordiques challenge the final result of the game, which the team decided against. The Nordiques then won Game 6 at home, while the Canadians won the deciding game 7-5-3, scoring all their goals in the second period. Now, for more than pretty much 6 years, there was no Nordiques-Montreal playoff series. However, in the 93 playoffs, the Canadians and Nordiques met in the opening round. The Nordiques took a 2-0 lead in the series, winning 1 of the 2 games at home in overtime, but Montreal then won 4 straight games after that to capture the series. Like I said, Ron Hextall, the Nordique starter, 3 of the 6 games went to overtime, with Hextall losing 2, including Game 5 in Quebec City, which came to the lead in the series. A 6-2 victory in Game 6 clinched the series for the Habs, who again later won the Stanley Cup. The rivalry came to an end following the 1995 season, when the Nords relocated to Denver and became the Colorado Avalanche. Now, note this, the rivalry has never completely died out. In 2002, the Avalanche had an exhibition game against the Habs in Quebec City. When Joe Sakic, a former Nordique, entered the arena with Nordique blue, the fans gave him a thundering ovation. He said that you're not going to find a better hockey city. It was real moving. There are no words. In 2010, Le City Montréal, Quebec, a television series featuring games between amateur teams from the two cities premiered. Now, some people question why this rivalry started in the first place. I have my own theories because here's how it worked, ladies and gentlemen. Maritimers were the original 6 Leafs in Montreal. When the Nordiques showed up, there was a whole bunch of people in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, would go to the games at the Coliseum when the WHA merged with the NHL. They built up a fan base. And he basically went back to the home region and said, listen, if Montreal ever plays Quebec, this is going to be like 2 versions of the Montreal Canadiens playing against each other but with different jerseys on. And I tend to agree. Now, people talk about the social, economic, whatever bullshit. Yeah, that's something to do with it, but it was just good hockey because where else? Like if you're an Anglophone in New Brunswick and you don't like the French, you got 2 French teams beating you up. If you're like that white supremacist mentality, you're in your cups, man. You're in your cups. And I know a lot of people wouldn't even take up for the Nordiques until they started playing the Montreal Canadiens, and these were white Anglophones. I know members of the Core Party, which was a white supremacist party in New Brunswick for a number of years, were not watching hockey until the Nordiques and Montreal started a rivalry. How do I know this? Because it was in Woodstock, New Brunswick, when the English-speaking Canadians in New Brunswick was formed, and I was told by some of the membership, I'm awful glad there's a bunch of Quebecers there to fight against the Federalists, because he didn't like the federal government. So that's just to show you the different layers of the situation. But when it came down to it, 99.9% of the people love the rivalry because hockey should be rivalries. There's no rivalry with the Leafs, no rivalry with the Bruins anymore. We're beating them all the time. Sure, they defeated us once. There was no rivalry with Vancouver, no rivalry with Hartford. You couldn't hold it. Anyway, now, for a lot of people that don't know this, Quebec is the capital of Quebec. Montreal is the province's largest city. One Nordiques employee once said of the disparity between the size of the two cities, Quebec City has always had a relationship of frustration with Montreal. This rivalry is the first time that Montreal and Quebec City can compete head-to-head in one event. Now, the great writer Michael Faber wrote that hostility towards the Canadiens Quebec City, dating back to the team signing of Jean Beliveau, who had previously played with the senior squad, the Quebec Aces. Now, according to CP, the Battle of Quebec also matched teams with opposite backgrounds. The Canadiens were a traditionally strong team, while the Nordiques were relatively new to NHL and were basically what they call a grinding squad. Now, the great Peter Stachny said of the rivalry, it's like 2 camps, each representing something. You're just not playing for your team. You're playing for your 500,000 supporters, and you're playing for their 1 or 2 million supporters. Now, again, the teams took on a political symbolism during the rivalry. The Canadiens were seen as reflective those in favor of keeping Quebec in Canada, while the Nordiques were seen as a symbol of Quebec independence. The Nordiques gained a large Francophone fan base in Quebec and outside of Quebec, and their uniforms contained the colors and crests from the province's flag. One early 1980 survey by La Presse newspaper found that outside of East Montreal, support to the Canadiens and Nordiques tended to mirror where support existed for the Quebec Liberal Party and the Parti Québécois, respectively. Now, a concurrent rivalry took place between the team's owners, or I call the subgenre the Beer Wars, again, which were both breweries. Molson had purchased ownership of the Canadiens before the NHL WHA merger, and the Nordiques were controlled by Carl O'Keefe, who broadcast their games on the great Quebec channel TQS, mostly on Thursday nights. Now, in May 1982, following the Canadiens' elimination from the playoffs at the hands of the Nordiques the previous month, a 9.5% decline in Quebec's beer consumption was recorded. Montreal reporter Red Fisher credited Molson and Carl O'Keefe for expanding the rivalry, saying the breweries have carried the red flags in this. So, promoting it would sell more beer. But the danger with this as well, ladies and gentlemen, not only selling more beer is basically the battle for ad space and the battle for TV space. If you would be called up, let's say TQS were called up to sponsor a Nordiques game. Some people didn't want to do it, or some people jumped at the chance. So it was an advertising battle as well. Now, we're talking also about league television rights. He fought multiple battles. When the Nordiques joined the NHL and merged with the WHA, a clause in a contract forced the Nordiques to forfeit revenue from Hockey Night in Canada telecasts for 5 years. Molson was a leading sponsor of the broadcast, and Nordiques president Marcel Lebeau cited the agreement as an extension of the Molson-Carling O'Keefe rivalry. Now, the teams also wound up on opposite sides of a dispute over the trans-border agreement, which allowed the Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs to receive most of the proceeds from television rights in Canada. The Nordiques eventually joined U.S.-based franchises in '84 in trying to have games played in the U.S. televised. This led to a $22 million lawsuit by the other Canadian-based teams, which was settled out of court. But you were seeing more games on CTV, more games, I think CHCH, different independent channels across Canada. It was a very interesting rivalry. But when it comes down to it, in 2021, again, you're talking with the Leafs Canadians. There is no rivalry. There is no rivalry. There's none. Nada. Zip. When you have an interprovincial rivalry, like Montreal had, the fight for draft picks, literally fighting on the ice. When's the last time you heard a Toronto Maple Leaf player challenge a Montreal Canadian player to a brawl, or a brawl involving the Leafs and Canadians? Never happens. Never will happen. Like I said, there is no rivalry. The Leafs killed it. They had an opportunity back in the 70s, but they traded all their good players, or they did bad management. They could have easily won at least one of the cups. The Islanders won in the early 80s if they would have kept it together. Montreal, the rivalry killed their Stanley Cup chances and improved them. Give an example. '84, there were two upsets with Quebec to go past the Islanders in the semifinal. But yet, in '86 and '93, they couldn't have won the cup were they not as strong they were in the Battle of Quebec in '86 in the regular season and in '93 in the playoffs. If you watch the 6-game series against the Nordiques, okay, the worm turned. The ghost of the forum arrived. And '82, Quebec shouldn't have won. '85, Quebec shouldn't have won, but they overachieved, but they couldn't hold the momentum. And Quebec could have easily won the cup, but they burned themselves out too much to try to knock off the Habs. So can you imagine if they were more focused? But when the Nordiques left, it caused the TQS channel, their main network, to fold, as we say, or be rebranded, whatever. And it's not been the same. Montreal Canadiens have not been the same since the Nordiques left. And there's a reason why. They haven't won a cup since. It has more to do with Nordiques not being there, because that was a goal. That was a motivation. It's not Gary Bettman put the curse on most of the Canadian teams, which a lot of people believe it's an ongoing thing. But there's a complete connection. You must be available to beat somebody. Would the Washington Redskins would have won all their Super Bowls were they not chasing the Dallas Cowboys? Okay? Would the Green Bay Packers not have won all those Super Bowls were they not trying to outlast the Eagles and the Bears and all their major rivals? You need rivalry. So in 2021, when you're watching the first round of playoffs between Montreal, an injured team, against Toronto, a stacked team, or a bunch of veterans, that is not hockey. That is just corporate 2021. Hockey is Mike McPhee and the rest of the Montreal Canadiens, Chrissy Nyland, taking on Wally Weir and Pat Price and Dale Hunter and Louis Schleger and Clint Malarchuk, Richard 78 from Montreal. That's a rivalry. Basil McRae was in there too, John Cordick, all these players. So, watch the playoffs. If you're trying to win, not going to give you anything. You're not going to win the cup this year anyway. There's no way Toronto's going to win the cup because the Northern Division was weak this year. You never played a strong team in the division other than Edmonton, and Edmonton hit and miss. But the Nordique rivalry, the Quebec-Montreal rivalry, will never be seen again. We knew it wasn't going to last forever because Joe Frazier versus Muhammad Ali could only last so long, okay? Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler Hearns, all these great rivalries. Zale Graziano, okay? Go on and on. Duran de Jesus, the great rivalries of boxing. It's the closest hockey's ever become to the boxing. You might as well had the Michael Buffer get ready to rumble for the Nordic rivalry. But ladies and gentlemen, all I know is that I used to watch these games, and I said to myself, turning 40 years later, I'm going to explain why that Canadians and Quebecers and New Brunswickers and Maritimers, it doesn't really apply, by the way, to people out west. If you're from the Maritimes in Quebec, you get the rivalry. It's a very exclusive thing. We got it. All 7 million or 10 million of us, from Newfoundland to the Quebec border with Ontario, we got it. So that's my spiel for today. If you like what we're doing here, we're a vintage podcast. Give us a like, comment, and subscribe. I always wanted to have a course, teach a course about the Battle of Quebec and break down each series. Maybe one day I will do it. But if you're going to pass this course, you got to remember this, ladies and gentlemen. When the Nordiques came in 1972, one of the very famous writers saying the ever join the NHL are going to be trouble. Look it up. And here we are still talking about it 49 years later. Thanks for listening. Bye.